Assalamualaikum dan salam sejahtera. Terima kasih kerana menonton Sudut Pandang yang disiarkan secara langsung dari studio AWANI Bukit Kewangan, Kuala Lumpur. Terima kasih juga kepada anda kerana telah menyokong Sudut Pandang selama ini, terutamanya ibu-ibu yang di rumah, ibu-ibu yang profesional baru pulang kerja yang menonton Sudut Pandang. Selamat Hari Ibu, saya harap tidak terlalu lambat. Tetapi 15 hari bulan ini juga adalah Hari Keluarga sedunia, dan sebenarnya itu mengambil contoh Hari Ibu dan juga Hari Keluarga, saya ingin pada malam ini membincangkan tentang impak ataupun kesan krisis ekonomi secara khusus terhadap wanita, dan juga kerana wanita itu memainkan peranan penting dalam keluarga kepada keluarga. Oleh itu saya ingin meminta kebenaran dan izin untuk berbicara dalam bahasa Inggeris. I would like now to speak in English because I have an international guest tonight. She is Dr. Noeleen Heyzer. She is the Under Secretary of the UN. And she's also from the Economic and Social Commission for Asia and Pacific. She's the Executive Secretary for ESCAP, I call it. And the most important thing tonight is we've been discussing the subprime crisis and economic impact of the global crisis on a lot of things. But tonight, I want to just narrow it down to women and family. And is it still relevant nowadays to look at things from a gender perspective when people around the world look at so many things regardless of race, color or gender? But in the research that was published recently, your own organization has a role in that research. You found that there's a lot of bad things, I would call it, in terms of data that show that the most impacted and the most suffering will come from the women's segment of society in Asia and Pacific. Why is that so, and why must we still look at a crisis or the impact of a crisis from a gender perspective? Dr. Noeleen Heyzer.
Thank you very much, Kamarul, and thank you for having me on your program. As long as the world is an unequal world, and you have disparities. And in Asia, even though we have the major economic powerhouses, there are disparities along the line of gender, class, even in terms of some of the ethnic lines and so on. And therefore, the effects of the economic crisis still need to be looked at through these lenses. Why women? Well, largely because the financial crisis has become an economic crisis, and it has affected the real economy through the export sector. And in the export sector, if you look at the global production system, you have the global production system that is very much based on labor-intensive industries, as well as home-based industries and the informal sector. It's still highly dependent for cheap goods and flexible labor that is based in terms of women's labor. So you find about 80 to 90% of the labor-intensive workers in the manufacturing sector are women. And here, when you have a plunge in exports, in many of the export-dependent countries, the first people to be affected, unfortunately, are your women. And also the informal sector, especially at the time when the flexibility of work then becomes an important issue. And so it's not just the right to work, but also the rights at work that are being affected. Many of the formal sector people and workers, because of lack of protection, will then move to the informal sector. And there they will then depress further the wages in the informal sector.
More and more in Southeast Asian countries, for example, we have specific ministries to look at the welfare of women, and they work together with a lot of other ministries. Is this not enough to mitigate the impact of economic crisis? Because for Malaysia, for example, we have come up with a stimulus package or a second stimulus package. It's billions of ringgit Malaysia, for example. And do you think the way we've been approaching it, that we must from the very beginning, from the idea stage, encapsulate these specific points for women? Or do you think that should be a big mother policy and big mother statement, and from there on we see that, okay, this area is specifically for women, hence it helps the family. How do you think it should be done?
You know, at the end of the day, it is not women and kind of society. They are part of society and part of the economy. And in fact, in many countries, they're the driver, they're the economic drivers for the growth economy. And what we need to actually do is to ensure that that this is recognized. So in other words, this is mainstream. It's not something just for the women's ministry, but it's something for the finance ministry, it's something for the planning ministry, it's something also for the social development people, because at the end of the day, the economics and the social development are so integrated that you cannot have economic growth without social progress. But at the same time, social progress, unless it's invested in, will not drive for economic growth. A very good example is actually if there's not enough social protection in your society, and you have a situation where the real economy is being affected, you have income insecurity, and people who are income insecure will not spend. So when you have a stimulus packages that says, let's stimulate our domestic demand, who's going to buy? Who are your consumers? If you have social protection that allow people to feel more secure, then you'll find that people spend a lot more. So I would say that this is something that needs to be looked at in a holistic, integrated way. But also in terms of the stimulus packages, it's not enough to just focus your stimulus packages on physical infrastructure. You need to invest it in your education, in your healthcare, and these sectors obviously will help women. You also need to invest, for example, in your water sector, your agriculture sector, and still 60% of the agricultural workforce, Kamarul, are still women.
It's interesting how, from the economic perspective of the crisis, this is a time that we look back. Maybe we don't have to do it this way. You know, the model that the Asian countries has inherited from the West, for example, and now we started thinking that we can do it our way, and maybe this is the best time ever to look back at the economic model and say, we don't have to do it that way. We don't have to only have economic progress, to have social progress.
Yeah.
We can maybe have both together at the same time. It'll be more holistic, for example. Is this what the Commission is trying to do?
You know, you are absolutely right, because this is a time for deep rethinking and also to look at a shift in terms of a development paradigm. What I call to address the three imbalances: the economic imbalances and disparities, the social imbalances, and the ecological imbalances. And this is a tremendous opportunity to actually get our development right, so that it is more inclusive and it's more sustainable. So it is more inclusive in terms of making sure that the poor gets addressed. So if you're doing, say, a food security framework for the country, for example, you would pay attention, say, to the smallholders and to the small farmers and to the women farmers. But at the same time, if you are looking at your economic growth model, you would also look at the ecological, the fragile planet which we have. And how do you ensure that in your economic growth, you actually take care of the planet? And therefore, how do you develop green industries, greener energy systems, and so on? And this is a tremendous opportunity to really rethink our development paradigm.
I have to go for the first short break, but once we are back, there's a lot of conferences that you have attended, I've Googled on the net, even in Bangkok itself. Maybe you can point to a specific examples of cases how women suffered because of the economic crisis. We've been feeling it since the end of last year, but maybe down the road now into the mid of 2009. Where are we now? And then maybe we can move on from there to find real solutions. We'll get back after this short break.
Thank you.
Thank you for still watching Sudut Pandang. I'm still here with Dr. Noeleen Heyzer discussing about the economic crisis and its impact on women and the family. And we can have our own model of economic development which incorporates the social elements as not as an afterthought, but as a preconceived idea since the beginning. But can you give us specific examples across the region of how badly women has been impacted by the economic crisis, maybe directly?
Yeah, I think one is obviously the loss of jobs, and the other one is the loss of income. Worse, they have to accept worse their conditions of work have been also affected. But more important, many of the women have also been asked to take care of their families, and therefore the increased burden in what is called the care economy. But also in many of the cases, when sacrifices have to be made in terms of coping strategies, is the girls who have been brought out of school, and some of the poorer kind of countries, what you have is the fact that when the household have to stinge on food because of the high food prices, it's the women who eat last, or the girl child who have less access to food. So these are all impacts. But equally, because of the gender effects of this crisis, men are also losing work in terms of the auto industry and so on. And you have very high youth unemployment, but also because many of the migrant workers are being returned. So you have a situation, unfortunately, of increased unemployment, and therefore, because there's no other job sources, there's a turn to criminality. And when
the victims are still
the victims are very much women. Criminality in terms of petty thefts, bags being snatched, and so on. But also the fact that unfortunately crime rates have, especially in terms of rape, that has increased tremendously. And I saw the figures in Malaysia from 2007 to 2008. There's been an increase of 300% in terms of rape cases, and this is something that is very problematic, and therefore part of the stimulus package should be looking at safety and security of the population.
How do we move on from here collectively as a region, Asia Pacific, for example, to work together in this? Because movement of workers from one country to another, that's an international issue. But within ourselves, we can somehow come to arrangement for that. For example, we still need foreign workers, for example. But how do we manage that to take into consideration all this, not as just one nation looking after its interests, but as a region, and a very forward-looking region at that, because there's no old model to look to. We must define this and define this our way now, for example.
You know, Kamarul, you're absolutely right, because Asia is not a coordinated continent, and it's so diverse. In fact, the countries that I cover would cover from Iran all the way to North Korea, to the Pacific Islands. But at the same time, I mean, what we have found is that Asia Pacific is more integrated with the rest of the world than with itself, which means that even if you look at export figures, the export trade, the intra trade in the Asia Pacific region is at 37%. If you look at NAFTA, it's about 57%, and the EU is about 68%. And therefore, there is a lot that can be done in terms of intra-regional trade, in terms of the facilitation of trades across border, that we can be a more coordinated Asia Pacific, and not only in terms of trade, in terms of developing a regional market besides just a domestic market. But we could also be more coordinated in terms of currency exchanges, so that we do not suffer from the what I call the kind of a decline in our asset base because of foreign exchange assets. But we also need to be more coordinated in terms of our social development policy, which can be developed much stronger, and also in terms of our tendency and our policies on migrant workers. I think this is something that is very important, because both sending and receiving countries need our migrant workers, but this have got to be coordinated, and this also will have to be protected.
New research would yield new data, but until they come in, because women nowadays, they work across borders, like domestic helpers, for example, or even singers. They move beyond countries. Southeast Asia as a region has been trying to go into one community. Do you think we should focus more on that? And because they say the answer lies in Asia too. Our foreign markets, as in West Europe and also in America, is going down. But among ourselves, we can somehow generate the supply and the demand within our own region. But before we solve all these red tapes and bureaucracy that create artificial inflationary value, for example, towards the movement of workers. Illegal foreign worker would get in the black market for what, 1,000 Malaysian ringgit or 2,000, 3,000, 4,000. For example, if you just open it up, and there's a free flow of legal workers moving around, but of course in a very controlled and administered way. This can directly reduce the impact and bring up the social awareness and at the same time. But all these are big commitments.
And this is something that can be done if that we have the right will. And because what it will do is that it will actually address the issue of criminality. It will reduce people smuggling and trafficking. And this is something that is extremely important. Because if we don't do it, I don't think we have a choice. This is a tremendous opportunity.
How to start? Who will start it?
I think to basically get the sending and receiving countries to come to the table and to see this not as a short-term phenomena, but as part of an integrated development strategy. In other words, the sending countries are highly dependent on these workers for the remittances, but at the same time, the receiving countries need these workers for the economic growth. So how then do we bring these two sides together in a way that would make sense and that would manage it in such a way where both sides or both sets of countries would benefit? It is possible. We have talked about more difficult issues and we've come out with common solutions. But this is time for Asia Pacific to take leadership, take control of its own destiny, and to basically think of itself beyond national boundaries. Because unfortunately, many of the issues that we face, from ecological issues to water issues to trafficking issues to economic policies, most of these are transnational boundary issues that require regional solutions.
And policymakers, but I don't want to talk about policymakers anymore. I want to go back to the individual, the single unit that forms the family, the nucleus of society. Changing values, globalization, economic crisis is trans-boundary and all that. How does one person, a unit in itself, works to incorporate all that? Because these are big tasks and challenges ahead. You suddenly ask a person who's deeply rooted in his own culture to suddenly move 400 miles away across the sea and work somewhere else. At the same time, got retrenched and then have to move again to maybe another country and get a job. How does this play into the psyche and how does this work into the nucleus of the society, which is the family in Southeast Asia, Asia and Asia Pacific, for example? We'll discuss that after this short break. Thank you for still watching Sudut Pandang. I don't have much time left. So here is a person in Southeast Asia, for example, maybe early 20s, with minimal education, having to move across borders to find work and send back income to the family behind. And we've talked before how the economic crisis will make women, for example, the first group to be retrenched. It will diminish their income disposability, for example, in terms of having less to care for the family behind. And that's not talking about the informal sector or the no-pay work where you look after the elderly or the sickly, and usually the woman side of society that takes care of all that. So how do you see this changing the individual? Because the individual must now rise and the individual will influence the decision of the family and hence society. How do you look at all this in the Commission?
Well, obviously there are many changes that are happening, and because our lives are so interconnected and globalized in many ways, I honestly think it's time not just to hold our state accountable, nor our families accountable, but also the private sector, because people move across the company lines and so on. And this is time to bring back corporate social responsibility, to rebuild trust. Trust has been broken, and broken in a terrible way. It has been shattered in terms of the banking system, the financial system, and so on. And it's extremely important for the private sector now to play a role where whereby it can actually take care of its workforce. And that because what I saw was that whilst productivity has increased over the last 3 decades, wages have not, especially the percentage of wages vis-a-vis the productivity gains. And it's extremely important to increase workers' income and so that they can actually be safe and they can be in the formal sector. Unfortunately, this is not happening, and the profitability that comes in from the rise of productivity has unfortunately gone to the bonuses of many of the chief top leaders of the corporate sector.
I'm not trying to tell the policymakers anything, but we have been discussing on this show itself about Malaysia being trapped in the middle income wage kind of predicament. But moving forward with that, even if we raise the income, how to make sure that it's aggregated to where it should be aggregated to, for example, because when you have more women becoming professionals, then the clash with the traditional value system, at the end of the day, a lot of sectors have moved forward, but some thinking still remains that man is still the dominant head of the family, hence the empowerment of the financial decisions, for example, resides in the male head of the family. But now, with changing values and things like what we have discussed, how to make sure that it goes back to where it should be, because it's too easy for when you empower the women who have not nothing of this before, but once they are up there, they might not be looking down to help where it should be giving help anyway.
I think that much of the research that we have seen shows that when women are earning, the investment is very much to children and to the families as well. And I think that healthy families, at the end of the day, because we're talking about the International Day of the Family, is very much based on equality, on dignity, and on respect. And the best way of doing that is to respect both the lives and the work of women. Because I was shocked at the figures, even on maternal mortality, that unfortunately too many women die because they become mothers, and it's so unnecessary. Why? And this is time for us to really relook at what we mean when we say it's important to invest in women's lives.
Empowering women is one thing, but I'll put it in another way. How to make sure that the men in society acknowledge all this and give women their credit where it's deserved. Because if you look at it, at the end of the day, the percentage of workforce that involve women earning in the lower bracket of income is still a lot. Even if you empower them, 20% or 30% of the women workforce to move up, it still need the helping hand of the person already on top, policymakers or whoever it is, to bring them up. But if this is not done, you can put in any legislative laws and rules, but it's not going to be done.
That's why having men as partners are extremely important.
Is that the new dialogue now?
Men as partners, well, it's always been, as far as I know. But I have to say that there have been many supportive men. My Secretary General, ever since he came in, he appointed 9 women under Secretary Generals for the first time. And the percentage and the quota of women in top leadership posts of the United Nations has improved. He also launched a major campaign on ending violence against women, and has in fact gotten male heads of states to commit themselves to changing laws that discriminate against women. So I think we are having a new breed of men, more enlightened men, and many of the younger men, many of my friends who are in the younger age group also find that relating to women who are empowered, in fact, helps with the whole the nature of that relationship as well.
This is the irony of things. If you put a quota on how many women you should have in certain areas or industry, for example, it's good to ensure that. But it also gives the perception that women still need to be helped.
Yes.
So
they
we have 1 minute left.
Yes, they still need to be helped, and until we have a 50-50 case.
Do you think that's the fairest of all deduction of 50-50?
No, I actually think that at the end of the day is what people do with the power relationship and with the power that they are given, men or women, and therefore that is how I would see. It's basically about accountability.
Okay, thank you so much. We have to leave it at that. Thank you, Dr. Noeleen Heyzer.
Thank you
So much for coming. Thanks to you for listening. Terima kasih banyak kepada anda yang telah menonton. Hantarkan pandangan anda sendiri pada sudut pandang astro.com.my, dan ingat 15 hari bulan Hari Keluarga, dan fikirkanlah kerana itu adalah unit utama yang membentuk masyarakat. Terima kasih dan selamat malam.